Welcome. Good morning. On this Darshan Day, Mother's arrival, final arrival day in the ashram. In which he said that that day kind of was the promise of their victory over the adverse forces.
Is 1920?
Yes.
Definitely. Definitely, Sri Auroville.
So Sri Aurobindo and Mother coming together, working together, finally settled in the ashram. So we're reading in Book 1, Canto 3. In the first two cantos, we were introduced to Savitri, the main protagonist, the Divine Mother, an earlier incarnation of the Divine Mother on earth. And in Canto 3, we're introduced to her father, Aswapati. Aswapati is a great king and seer, yogi. And in this canto, we are introduced to his yoga. It's titled The Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Soul's Release. And we're kind of given an overview of his yoga, of his spiritual realization in this canto and in the following couple of cantos. And afterwards, we'll be taken on a long journey through the inner dimensions of consciousness that he travels, seeking for the solution to the earth's difficulties and problems. Towards the end of that journey, in his kind of deep inward plunge into the inner consciousness, he finds the Divine Mother in the higher realms of consciousness and asks her to come down on earth in order to save the world, to save humanity, to release it from its ignorance and difficulties. And she agrees to come. And then she is born as his daughter, and that's Savitri. So this is kind of a bit of, we're introduced to Savitri, then we kind of are in a flashback to the past, and we learn about Aswapati's inner journey towards that experience of the Divine Mother. And what we find also in this canto about Aswapati is that he's not an ordinary human being or ordinary yogi. He is kind of also an incarnation of the divine within humanity, leading the evolutionary development. And so he's the forefront of the evolution in the world. And so he is also kind of an avatar of the divine. So that was revealed early on in the canto, right in the beginning of the canto. It says, for example, his human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man, a greater sonship was his divine right. And so we're not given too much about his sadhana, his practice of yoga, but right from the beginning we see that he's experiencing these very high states of consciousness and realization. And just from the last time, I just read a couple of short passages that give a sense of his realization. On page 28, he lived in the mystic space where thought is born and will is nursed by an ethereal power and fed on the white milk of the eternal strength till it grows into the likeness of a god. In the witnesses' occult rooms with mind-built walls, on hidden interiors, lurking passages, open the windows of the inner sight. He owned the house of undivided time. And a little bit further down, the inner planes uncovered their crystal doors. Strange powers and influences touched his life. A vision came of higher realms than ours, a consciousness of brighter fields and skies, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men, and subtler bodies than these passing frames, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light, and movements pushed by a superconscient force, and joys that never flowed through mortal limbs, and lovelier scenes than earth's, and happier lives. So, Helmut, would you like to begin?
Just to read a couple of sentences.
At the break on 34.
Only a while, at first, these heavenlier states, these large, white horse upliftings could endure. The high and luminous tension breaks too soon. The body's stone stillness and the life's hushed trance, the breathless might and calm of silent mind. Or slowly they fail as sets a golden day. The restless, never members tire of these. A nostalgia of old little works and joys, a need to call back small familiar selves, to tread the accustomed and inferior way, the need to rest in a natural pose of fall, as a child who learns to walk and walk not run, replace the tightened will forever to climb, on the heart's altar dim the sacred fire. An old pull of subconscious chords renews. It draws the unwilling spirit from the heights, or a dull gravitation drags us down to the blind-driven inertia of our days.
Thank you. Let's pause. While we're not given much in the way of his practice of, the discipline that he he practices, we are given a sense that there is a process of sadhana that is going on within him, that his realization, as high as it is, in the beginning it's not a permanent realization, that he comes down from these heights of consciousness back into the normal human consciousness and lives again like a human being, perhaps still faces the same kinds of difficulties. Sri Aurobindo has often talked about the integral yoga, that its process is one of kind of an oscillation, one of ascent going up into higher states of consciousness, but then there's a descent also. So one comes back down into the normal consciousness, into the outer consciousness. But as one comes down, something from above also comes down and works on that lower consciousness and begins to open that up also to these higher states, these higher possibilities. So that's what's being described here.
The current line, the high and luminous tension.
Yeah.
Why there is a tension and such?
Mm. Yeah, perhaps it's not always so easy to maintain that kind of high state of perfect consciousness. Well, there is a pressure, there's a pull from below. So that creates the tension. And here, kind of towards the lower part of that, an old pull of subconscious cords renews. It draws the unwilling spirit from the heights. So that's creating the tension.
It's not always negative tension. Expectations, very positive tension for us. The outer consciousness of the human being, it's accustomed to tread the accustomed and inferior way. The outer consciousness of human beings, it's interacting with others on a very kind of material level. And these high states that he's experiencing, it's like, that's something of the inner consciousness. The inner consciousness can kind of open to that, but we're pulled back out again. Just like when we meditate, you can meditate for a certain period of time, but after some time, one has to come back.
It's the conflict between the inner being and the outer.
Yes?
You mentioned that on the way down, something comes down from the top.
Yeah.
What is that? That I wasn't sure about.
Yeah, he will. He's going to describe that in the next passage that we read. So you'll see. And maybe you can read it. So starting from this too, the Supreme Diplomat can use. So he's describing exactly the answer to your question.
This tool, the Supreme Diplomat can use. He makes our fall a means for greater rise. For into ignorant nature's dusty field, into the half-ordered chaos of mortal life, the formless power, the self of eternal light. Follow in the shadow of the Spirit's descent, the twin duality forever one, chooses its home amid the tumults of the sense. He comes unseen into our darker parts, uncurtained by the darkness, does his work. A subtle and all-knowing guest and guide, till they too feel the need and will to change. All here must learn to obey a higher law. Our body's cells must hold the immortal's flame, else would the spirit reach alone its source. Leaving the half-saved world to its dubious fate, nature would ever labor unredeemed, our earth would ever spin unhelped in space, and this immense creation's purpose fail, till at last the frustrate universe sank undone.
Thank you. Let's pause there. It's interesting that he describes what or who follows in this descent towards at the bottom of the page 34, the formless power, the self of eternal light. Follow in the shadow of the Spirit's descent. The twin duality, forever one, chooses its home mid the tumults of the sense. He comes unseen into our darker parts, and curtained by the darkness, does his work. So this is the Lord and His Shakti, His power. The Lord and the Mother. They are the twin duality forever one. They hold each within themselves. And they choose to come and make this world, our life, their home.
So would it be fair to say that when we are descending, we did not lose hope. We are carrying something from up while on the way down. Seems to be the message.
Yeah.
Not despair. Looks like the same thing.
Yeah, we're often kind of given the advice to, one, persevere, that the difficulties, continue, but you persevere. But also they advise us to establish an equality and equanimity to both the problems and the positive states that we experience. So don't despair, be equal to these things. Learn to stand back in a way from them, to observe that process of nature, the lower nature with its difficulties, its desires, its, attraction to sensual objects. Stand back from that, observe it, call in the force, the power, the Lord into these things, offer them to the divine. In that way, that facilitates their transformation. They too, till they too feel the need and will to change. We have higher parts of our nature that want to follow the divine, that aspire, that are devoted, but the lower parts of our nature are more resistant. They also need to be convinced. That's why that process takes time and why there's this oscillation of positive states and more negative states. All here must learn to obey a higher law. Our body's cells must hold the immortal's flame. Not only the parts of our lower vital, but even the body must learn to open up to this light and power of the divine. And then we see that even this is part of the plan or a necessity. Else would the Spirit reach alone its source, leaving a half-saved world to its dubious fate. Sri Aurobindo often talked of the kind of older yogas of the traditional paths in which the yogi would go inside, deep within, enter into a high state of consciousness, and then allow the body just to drop off, and the soul would go into that higher state. But that leaves the world as it is. It doesn't change the life. That one soul is released from the difficulty. He's freed, but the rest of the souls remain immersed in the problems of life.
Larry, in the beginning, Sri Aurobindo said maybe in the jail of Alipore, I'm waiting something, you're waiting mother. But without mother, not start supramental yoga. Without mother. It was that he stayed in the tradition. What you said is very, very interesting. It's very important also, mother in the body. But Sri Aurobindo walking after that, when he meet mother in the body, but he give her everything after that.
Yeah, as he says in the book, The Mother, the short book that he wrote in a way to maybe facilitate the mother's kind of acceptance in the ashram and around, because she was a French lady and an Indian ashram teacher. So he was explaining who she is. And in that book, he also says, you know, it's only her force, her power that can redeem this world. And we see that also in Savitri. Aswapati travels through all the inner planes of consciousness, but he doesn't find the key to nature's change until he meets the Divine Mother and falls at her feet and asks her to come.
Thank you. I think Mother mentions also that the reason, although she is not French by her nativity, she's Egyptian. The divine incarnation in her higher self chose France as the location of her birth. Exactly when they migrated there, she was born.
Yes.
So that it would be a spiritual link between Europe and India. Because, as you said, although my soul belongs to India, it was planned for the divine. And even though by nativity she is not French, she is Egyptian.
Right.
But he born in Paris.
She was born in Paris for the reason of spiritual connect.
Very much.
Her grandparents and parents were not French.
I'm living where mother lives, near in Paris. Every place I follow.
Oh, yeah.
And the last in Rue du Val-de-Grâce. I'm living near his house. It's very interesting. I don't know in the beginning, but suddenly I discovered and so.
So she had some Egyptian blood, but kind of a French upbringing and socialization and would you like to read? Continue.
Even his godlike strength to rise must fall. His ray of consciousness withdrew behind, dim and eclipsed. His human outside strove to feel again the old sublimity. Bring the high, saving touch, the ethereal flame. Call back to its dire need and divine force. Always the power poured back like sun rain, or slowly in his breast a presence grew. Above the feet from which it fell. Each time he rose, there was a larger point, a dwelling on a higher spirit plane. The light remained in him the longest space. In this oscillation between earth and heaven, in this ineffable communion's climb, there grew in him, as grows a waxing moon, the glory of the integer of his soul.
Thank you. So again, we're seeing this oscillation of the consciousness. Those higher states withdrawing within, and then he becomes identified with the outer consciousness again. His human outside strove to feel again the old sublimities. So he comes back into his outer consciousness, but in that lower consciousness then he's striving to renew those higher states, to bring that back again. So that lower consciousness is aspiring, opening up more and more to those higher states. It begins to sense them and touch them, experience them, and then it wants more of that. It wants that experience back again. And so this process goes on and on. And as it goes, as it continues, then kind of the consciousness develops more integrally. A more integral realization comes that includes those lower parts of the nature as well. So it's not just an inner spiritual experience one has in a deep state of trance, but it becomes integrated with the life, the outer life, the movements, the actions, the activities of everyday life. And even the body begins to experience something of that. Shall we continue?
The union of the real with the unique, the gaze of the alone from every face, the presence of the eternal in the hours, widening the mortal mind's half look on things, bridging the gap between man's force and faith, made whole the fragment being we're here. At last was one the firm spiritual poise, a constant lodging in the eternal's real, a safety in the silence and the ray, a settlement in the immutable. His heights of being lived in the still self, his mind could rest in the supernal ground and look down at the magic and the play where the godchild lies the lap of night and dawn, and the everlasting goods not time's disguise. To the still heights and to the troubled depth, his equal spirit gave its vast ascent, the poised serenity of tranquil strength, the wide unshaken look on time's unrest, faced all experience with unaltered peace. Indifferent to the sorrow and delight, untempted by the marvel and the call, immobile it beheld the flux of things. Calm and apart supported all that is. His spirit's stillness helped the toiling world.
Thank you. We see that as a result of this oscillation in his consciousness, this coming down of the power of the divine into the lower nature, that he begins to have an integral realization in which he sees the divine in each thing experience around him, in the outer life. A union of the real with the unique, the one with the many. So in the many, each thing is unique. Each being is unique. Each person is unique. But now he sees the divine in each one. A gaze of the alone from every face. The presence of the eternal in the hours. So this joining of the one and the many is widening the mortal mind's half look on things. We only see the many, the differences. We don't see the one behind. Bridging the gap between man's force and fate. Made whole the fragment being we are here. At last was one a firm spiritual poise, a constant lodging in the eternal's realm, a safety in the silence and the ray, a settlement in the immutable. Finally, he was able to take a settled poise in that experience of oneness. He wasn't brought back down into the divided consciousness. He could remain in the consciousness of oneness, of unity everywhere. And from that poise, within the oneness, seeing the divine everywhere, he could look on life and its difficulties, its diversities, its uglinesses, its beauties, its joys, its pains. He could look on all of that kind of in a detached, equal way. See that this too is the divine. These things also. Where the God-child lies on the lap of night and dawn, and the everlasting puts on time's disguise. To the still heights and to the troubled depths, his equal spirit gave its vast ascent. So he's able to look upon these experiences as if from a distance, a little bit removed from it. From there he could give his assent to it. He wasn't disturbed by the difficulties of the lower nature. But he wasn't absorbed in them also. We see earlier when he would fall from that higher consciousness into the outer consciousness, then he would strive to feel again that higher oneness, that higher consciousness. The lower nature, the divided nature, would strive to bring that experience back again. But now he has a firm poise above this play of night and day.
I'm intrigued by the safety in the silence and the ray. Why does he choose silence and ray?
The spirit is inclined to silence always.
As I see it, it's like he's in total silence and then the ray can come.
Yeah. Because the mind is always equated to searching and knowing and travel. But it's only having mother, the creation itself is, before it starts or the way it started, it's always in introspective silence when you see the neighbor house there. It's always, even within each person, and in general, when you say divine, it equates to peace and bliss and silence and qualities which are expressed easily when the mind is quieted and in stillness. And light is only.
Yeah, the ray indicates light. It's a ray of the divine light. So in the silence and the light of the divine, I think, one description of the Spirit is Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. So pure existence, nothing else, just pure existence, is something, I think, close to that silence. It's just pure being. But it's a state of pure being that's enlightened with consciousness. It's full of light, awareness. It's a state of pure existence, but a conscious existence.
And then it results in bliss.
And that's the safety. That's the oneness behind all things. If we lose that, then we're caught in the changes of nature. We're caught in the tumults of the sense, as he says. And we need to we need to have that firm poise in the spirit behind. That's our safety. That's the still self, he says, his heights of being lived in the still self. Unmoving behind all the movements of nature.
It kind of looks very simple from that perspective.
It's always there. It's always standing back, and it's only that our consciousness is caught in the moment here, but we can step back from this outer consciousness into that. That spirit is always there, and we always have access to it. And he's describing what he sometimes calls the witness consciousness. It's a consciousness that is witnessing, observing the flux of nature, of life, but it's standing back from it in the peace, in the quiet, in the light. Nitya, would you like to continue? I think inspired by silence. In the middle of the page. Middle of the page, inspired by silence.
Inspired by silence. Indifferent, no? Indifferent to the sorrow and his delight? Yes.
Maybe.
Inspired by silence and the closed eyes sight. His force could work with a new luminous art on the crude material from which all is made, and the refusal of inertia's mass, and the grave front of the world's ignorance, and nescient matter and the huge error of life. As a sculptor chisels a deity out of stone, he slowly chipped off the dark envelope, line of defense of nature's ignorance, the illusion and mystery of the inconscient, in whose black ball the eternal wraps his head, that he may act unknown in cosmic time. a splendor of self-creation from the peaks, a transfiguration in the mystic depths. A happier cosmic working could begin and fashion the world shape in him and me. God found in nature, nature fulfilled in God.
Thank you. So he has gained that firm spiritual poise, constant lodging in the eternal's realm. And from there, from that poise, he could work on the outer nature. His force could work with a new luminous art on the crude material from which all is made, and the refusal of inertia's mass, and the gray front of the world's ignorance, and nescient matter, and the huge error of life. Once we are free from identification with that outer nature and have this firm poise in the spirit, then we can begin to work on the nature and change it, transform it.
In general yoga, is seen there as a witness and detach yourself. You can look down on the lower nature and not be affected by it. But here in Sri Guru's integral yoga, it's however great you may be, it's not, you can never transform it. And that's why the old yogis told this is all around and you have to escape and this is around. There is only the mother's force which can transform. And
Yeah.
the opening of force in this yoga, which even if you can observe and detach yourself and know, separate yourself, you cannot do much transformation without the force.
Yeah. Here he says his force, but I think you're right that that's the mother's force. It's a higher force that has to work. Maybe as we're still in process, of until we're, let's say, fully surrendered to her and that she is working in us as in like a transparent kind of glass or something, we also have to exert our own efforts. And there's a process of allowing her force to work in our efforts, right? So we open to her force, but we also do something.
Sri Aurobindo, in the force of the yoga, is describing to receive the force of the mother, we have to purify ourselves. Because if the force is going down, like it said on the first time, the eye continues, so it's coming from up. So it's describing in this book, the force has to come, so you have to make an effort to receive it, to be pure. Because if it's coming when you are not pure and hiding some part of ourselves, we're going to use it in the wrong way.
And I'm just saying that the sages, means they already have achieved the state of the rejection and they're already as a witness and detaching themselves. But still, they were not able to transform it. It's only after the mother's arrival that the state transformation can be. Even with all their effort that they did from this side. It's all
Yeah, there's kind of two related things. One is this witness that stands back from the nature and allows the nature to run its course and to do what it will. And one can remain in that state of detachment and be unaffected by all of what's happening. But Sri Aurobindo says there's another stage. When you have attained that stage, from that poise in the spirit, then you can become Lord of the nature. There is a dynamic force that works, but that dynamic force is united with that spirit, right? It has to be based on the spirit. If we try to exert force from our divided mind or divided will, it's going to be only, partially effective or ineffective. But from that poise of detachment, then a greater power can begin to work through us. And that's what seems to be happening here. But I think that, as I was kind of saying, that process of allowing that force to work is not just a kind of an instantaneous thing that happens, that at first it works through our kind of more personal will and effort. And gradually it takes those things up and overcomes their limitations and comes into its fullness.
But Larry, it's very interesting what she said. But I tell you my inner experience in Savitri Bhavan. 17 years when I came there, suddenly I started a lot of books, knowledge of Sri Aurobindo. I read it before, but I am concentrated in Agenda of the Mother. Agenda of the Mother is a book of transformation. I am not ready for that without knowledge of Sri Aurobindo. It was that I started all of books. In the beginning I read it, but I don't understand. And slowly, lot foundation of Indian culture, like Divine, Synthesis of Yoga, Savitri, all of books of Sri Aurobindo teach me. I stay 3 years only with Sri Aurobindo. And suddenly I take Agenda of the Mother. And slowly connection in me. And now God. No separation at all in me. That's all. Thank you. But it's very, very interesting. But before I am very connected with Mother, Paris and this and that. But in the beginning I had a lot of dream also with Sri Aurobindo. But I am concentrated with Mother. And slowly, totally. But it's a long process, especially in Auroville. For me, that's all. Thank you.
Question?
500, yeah? Thank you. 527, what is the pole?
Paul.
Is it a kind of problem?
A pall.
Black hole, the eternal wraps his head.
Yeah, it's a covering in general, but more specifically, it's a heavy cloth draped over a coffin. So it kind of carries this connotation of gloom. Yeah, you had a question?
Okay. Slightly earthly level, mundane level, I was trying to understand. There is one state where you have attained detachment.
Attained what?
Detachment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the state to be effective to help the whole humanity to rise, you need the higher force to come.
Yes.
Is that the right?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm still saying you're not leaving others out because they're all part of the same consciousness. At first, you are still separate, staying at a distance and looking at things. Now, armed with this higher power, you are able to be, as you said, you are the king of the nature. You can actually make changes and transform things. Not only about transformation of yourself, but I think it's transformation of things around you. Is that right?
That's correct. And as the mother, as the highest divine force, the divine's power works in you, then it can use you as an instrument for work in the world. That force flows through you out on others all around you. But we need more and more. It's not an instantaneous process. There has to be an alignment of that higher force with our personal force. Part of that is that oscillation that we were talking about. Ganga Lakshmi, I think.
Already me was seeing that task of power. Life made its home on the high tops of self. His soul, mind, heart become a single sun. Only life's lower reaches remain in. But there too, in the uncertain shadow of light, there was a ladder and a fiery breath. The ambiguous, cold, celestial presence watched by the inner witnesses, marvelous peace. Even on the struggling nature left below, strong periods of humiliation came. Lightnings and glory after glory burned. Experience was a toil of blaze and fire. Air rippled around the argosies of the gods. Strange reaches sailed to and from the unseen. Splendors of insight filled the blank of thought. Knowledge spoke to the unconscious stillnesses. Rivers poured down over these luminous thoughts. Visits of beauty, storm sweeps of delight, rain from the all-powerful mystery above.
Thank you. As I've mentioned in some of the earlier classes, that Aswapati's realization is this very integral realization. This is called the yoga of the soul's release, but it's actually more than that, because there's this fulfillment, like in the first line of the page, God found in nature, nature fulfilled in God. There's this integration of the spirit with the life and the matter of the world, with nature. And it says, already in him was seen that task of power. Life made its home on the high tops of self. His soul, mind, heart became a single sun. There's this integral realization. Only life's lower reaches remain dim. Only the lower part of the nature, maybe the lower vital, the physical consciousness, still was not fully enlightened, fully integrated, but even there was a working. The higher light, the higher power was working.
And the ambiguous cowled, he's cowled.
A long hooded cloak, especially of a monk. So again, it's kind of covered, a little bit like that black pall.
I think everything is hidden.
Cowled.
Ambiguous. I mean, it works like a trickle, silently, without, like it steams in silently, hiding itself.
Yeah, it's the power is working in that lower nature, but it's not fully apparent. Its working is not fully apparent to the individual. He may not see it working or not see it clearly. As he had said kind of earlier, that higher power comes down and it works unseen in our lower parts. This is kind of a reiteration of that. So the image is very apt of a kind of a hooded monk, this kind of spiritual presence, but covered up so that you can't really see it, see the person. Yeah, argosies it's a large merchant ship. So it's a ship, a boat. And then we see in the next line, strange riches sail to him from the unseen. So air is kind of flowing around this ship, but it's bringing riches from the higher consciousness.
There was a Greek colonial city called Ragusa. I think today it's Dubrovnik. And they were famous for their boats, for their ships, the argosies. That has some kind of Porsches, you know.
What is the name in Greek? Argo?
Argo.
No.
Argosy.
Argo. Seine.
Argosy.
Ah.
Yes. There's the story of the Argonauts.
And now it is called, you say?
Dubrovnik,
Dubrovnik.
on the Adriatic.
Ah, yes.
I think it belongs to, what's it called? One of these, doesn't come to me.
And here he's kind of describing, to some extent, this inspiration, intuitions coming down from above into the mind, into the lower consciousness. So as if coming on these ships, strange riches. But in the next line, splendors of insight filled the blank of thought. Knowledge spoke to the inconscient stillnesses. Rivers poured down of bliss and luminous force. Visits of beauty, storm sweeps of delight, rained from the all-powerful mystery above.
But knowledge spoke to the unconscious stillnesses means exactly. Knowledge spoke to unconscious.
Yeah, the inconscient stillnesses. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, but I think in the silence of the consciousness, these higher inspirations, higher intuitions can come. But here they're coming, descending all the way into he calls it inconscient stillnesses. I don't know. Yeah.
Enough matter.
Yeah, even more than ignorant. I mean, it's just completely lacking any awareness. But light, delight, riches, bliss, luminous force, all of these things are descending.
In the record of yoga where he was recording all his sadhana, you can see how he was working every day, so much on this field, like on love, power, knowledge, and body. And he was every day he was watching how it was progressing and going back. And this is what he described here.
And there too, you see that those oscillations, sometimes it comes very strong, then it's eclipsed for a period of time, then it comes again, but grows stronger and stronger.
But also river poured down of bliss and luminous force. Rivers after knowledge.
Yeah. Rivers pour down of bliss and luminous force. Sri Aurobindo talks about the rivers, I think in the Vedas, representing these kind of streams of light and consciousness coming from the higher consciousness, coming down.
In the Veda, you have 7 rivers.
Yeah.
Alors maybe this river connect knowledge.
Yeah, that's more related to knowledge usually, but here these are rivers of bliss, but luminous force.
Is another aspect of river.
Yeah, but also another aspect of intuition. I mean, when he talks about the transforming force along with the light, with this descent of light, he says it has this great power that comes with it.
Maybe it's just poetic way of saying it's the consciousness above the mind is so vast, and this is too narrow, and compare that coming down, it's always like a river, vast, coming and trickling down into our little mind. It's very narrow. It's just vast consciousness. trustworthy.
Sometimes he speaks of it like an ocean, but here there are rivers. So I think we will stop there with the eagles of omniscience for next time.